1304, and Scotland had been conquered by the British in an attempt to consolidate the Isles and to prevent the French from enveloping them one way or another. Victories at Dunbar and Berwick started the war off strong, with a setback at Stirling, but one final blow at Falkirk, and the end of William Wallace in 1305. However, the following year, at Scone, near Perth, William de Lamberton placed the crown upon a man's head, the guardian of the Kingdom of Scotland and commander of its army, Robert the Bruce. The war was back on. Edward I died in 1307, succeeded by his son, Edward II, who was not the man his father was, which made the English position weak. In 1313, Bruce demanded allegiance from all the remaining supporters of John Balliol, with the consequence being the loss of their land. He also demanded the English at Stirling surrendered, due to it being a vital route into the north. The castle was put to siege in 1314 by Bruce's son, Edward the Bruce, but by midsummer, the English had surrendered. This challenge couldn't be ignored by the English, and so they started to prepare a campaign into the Scottish lands once again. Edward II requested 2,000 heavy cavalry and 13,000 infantry, the largest invading army the English had yet. The Scots, however, numbered around 7,000 men, with no more than 500 mounted troops, and unlike the English cavalry, the Scottish cavalry wasn't well equipped to charge the enemy lines, but more suited as reconnaissance. No one truly knows the size difference between the English and Scottish ranks, but it is somewhere around the 1.5 to 3 times. Come the morning of the 23rd of June, it wasn't clear if the armies would engage. Robert the Bruce was still 8 miles away from his adversary, giving him the decision. He could either move north beyond the River Forth, or west upon the river towards the district of Moses and Hills. Robert knew the latter choice would influence Edward II's plans, all the while the English continued to Stirling. The English army marched 70 miles in a week in an attempt to rescue Stirling. This only led to his troops becoming extremely exhausted. Now that Edward was within Stirling's reach, he and his advisors began to make plans for the forthcoming battle. They knew where the Scots would likely be, and sent orders for the troops to be ready for the Scots to be established in bogey ground near the Forth. The English would advance in 4 forces, while the Scots would deploy the age-old tactic of the Schiltron, and their vanguard, commanded by Thomas Randolph, 1st Earl of Moray. It's important to make note that this battle was Robert the Bruce's attempt to legitimise his kingship for a victory in the field. An article by Medieval Warfare reads, Robert the Bruce, King of Scots, from 1306 until his death in 1329, aged 55, was no stranger to the battlefield. He waged war to wear down his Scottish opponents and the English regime in Scotland, culminating in the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, to legitimise his kingship and free his kingdom. It was a battle that Robert the Bruce hoped he would confirm his place on the throne and force Edward II to recognise him king. As stated by W.M. Mackenzie, the victory at Bannockburn is of more than national interest and had other results than those immediately affecting Scotland. Many medieval battles are well known for lasting only a few hours at best, which makes Bannockburn unique, in that it lasted 2 days. Robert the Bruce picked a flat field flanked by woodland known as New Park to set up camp for the coming fight. Bruce would split his forces into 4 divisions and form them into diamond formations. On June the 23rd, 2 English cavalry formations advanced, one commanded by the Earl of Gloucester and the other led by the Earl of Hereford. They followed a small detachment of infantry under Sir Robert Clifford and Sir Henry de Beaumont, who closed the gap towards the River Forth. This was meant to be the detachment that lifted the siege on Stirling. The cavalry was the first to cross the Bannockburn and headed towards the woodland that hid the Scots. little to the English knowledge. Robert the Bruce had ventured ahead and away from the woodland. He wasn't fully armoured for combat, but was equipped for recon, with little more than a hand axe for defence. The Earl of Hereford's nephew, Henry de Bohun, spotted Bruce poorly equipped and took advantage. He charged forward, lance in hand, engaging Bruce in lone combat. When Bruce engaged and charged with his axe, he decapitated Bohun. This account recorded by Vita Edwardi Secundi. On Sunday, which was the vigil of St. John's Day, as they, the English, passed by a certain wood and were approaching Stirling Castle, the Scots were seen straggling under the trees as if in flight, and a certain knight, Henry de Bohun, pursued them with the Welsh to the entrance of the wood. For he had in mind that if he found Robert the Bruce there, he would either kill him or carry him off captive. But he had come thither. Robert himself came suddenly out of his hiding place in the wood, and the said Henry, seeing that he could not resist the multitude of Scots, turned his horse with the intention of regaining his companions. But Robert opposed him and struck him on the head with an axe that he carried in his hand. His squire, trying to protect or rescue his lord, was overwhelmed by the Scots. The Scots proceeded to rush the cavalry, causing them to retreat and struggling over the Bannockburn. This encounter is important to Robert, as it showed his courage and ability to lead, inspiring his troops and earning their respect. The 2nd Cavalry Division was led by Robert Clifford and Henry de Beaumont, including Sir Thomas Grey of Heaton, father to the chronicler Thomas Grey. Thomas would describe the battle as such. Robert, Lord de Clifford, and Henry de Beaumont, with 300 men-at-arms, made a circuit upon the other side of the wood towards the castle, keeping the open ground. Thomas Randolph, 1st Earl of Moray, King Robert's nephew, who was the leader of the Scottish advance guard, hearing that his uncle had repulsed the advance guard of the English on the other side of the wood, thought that he must have his share, and issuing from the wood with his division, marched across the open ground towards the 2 aforenamed lords. Sir Henry de Beaumont called to his men, "Let us wait a little, let them come on, give them room." "Sir," said Sir Thomas Grey, "I doubt that whatever you give them now, they will have all too soon." "Very well," exclaimed the said Henry. "If you are afraid, be off." "Sir," answered the said Thomas, "it is not from fear that I shall fly this day." So saying, he spurred in between Beaumont and Sir William d'Eyncourt and charged into the thick of the enemy. William was killed, Thomas was taken prisoner, his horse being killed on the pikes, and he himself carried off with the Scots on foot when they marched off, having utterly routed the squadron of the said 2 lords. Some of the English fled to the castle, others to the king's army, which, having already left the road through the wood, had debouched upon a plain near the water of Forth beyond Bannockburn, an evil, deep, wet marsh where the said English army unharnessed and remained all night, having sadly lost confidence and being too much disaffected by the events of the day. Sir Thomas Grey, Scala Chronica, translated by Herbert Maxwell. During the night, the English forces crossed the stream known as the Bannockburn, setting up their ranks on a plain beyond it. Alexander Seton, a Scottish knight fighting for Edward II, defected to Robert the Bruce to tell him that the English morale was low and pushed him for an attack. At daybreak, Edward was surprised when the Scottish pikes emerged from the woods, but they would pause for a moment to kneel and pray, to which Edward mentioned, "They pray for mercy." One of his attendants replied, "For mercy, yes, but from God, not you. These men will conquer or die." The Earls of Gloucester and Hereford would argue over who should lead the vanguard, with the Earl of Gloucester also trying to encourage the king to delay the battle. He would later be accused of cowardice and was spurred by this insult. Gloucester met the Scots in battle with little troop beside him. They were surrounded and killed quickly. Pressured by the Scottish Shiltrons and no archer support to avoid friendly fire, they attempted a redeployment, but were dispersed by the Scottish cavalry. With the situation becoming worse for the English, Edward II was reportedly left to safety at all costs. After they were clear, Giles de Argentan said, "Sire, your protection was committed to me, but since you are now safely on your way, I will bid you farewell, for never yet have I fled from battle, nor will I now." He would die on the battlefield that day. Edward fled with his personal guard, and the retreat began a rout. Edward tried to hunker in Stirling Castle, but was turned away out of fear from imminent Scots. Edward II would flee to Dunbar Castle, later taking a ship to Berwick. Historian Peter Rees wrote, "Only one sizable group of men, all foot soldiers, made good their escape to England. These being a force of Welshmen under command of Sir Maurice de Berkeley, the majority would reach Carlisle. It's estimated of the 16,000 English infantry that day, 11,000 had been killed." Stirling Castle would of course fall to the Bruce immediately after the battle, along with the strongholds of Dunbar and Jedburgh. By 1315, only Berwick lay outside Robert the Bruce's grip. In 1328, the Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton was signed. Queen Isabel and Earl Mortimer of March, on behalf of the young Edward III, renounced any sovereignty to Scottish lands. A treaty that Edward III would rip up 5 years later.